All right, guys, we're going to be in Psalms 5, 6, and 7 tonight, if you'd open your Bibles. I love the Psalms that are written by David, because David was absolutely real with his Lord. And anybody that's gone through a real stressful time can understand that. If you've ever been in a really terrifying situation, or stress, or anger, or just life in general where it gets hard, I just love the way David puts things down. So let's start in verse 1 of Psalm 5. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my meditation. Give heed to my voice, to the voice of my cry, my King and my God. For to you I will pray. My voice you shall hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning I will direct it to you, and I will look up. For you are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness, nor shall evil dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand in your sight. You hate all the workers of iniquity. You shall destroy those who speak falsehoods. The Lord abhors bloodthirsty and deceitful men. But as for me, I will come into your house in the multitude of your mercy. In fear of you, I will worship toward your holy temple. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before my face, for there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward parts is destruction. Their throat is an open tomb. They flatter with their tongue. Pronounce them guilty, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against you. But let all those who rejoice put their trust in you. Let them ever shout for joy because you defend them. Let those who also love your name, be joyful in you. For you, O Lord, will bless the righteous. With favor you will surround him with a shield. I broke that down and said it really slow because in the poetic form they use polar opposites, or parallelisms is a better word for it, where they take somebody or something and they compare the opposite against each other so you get the idea of what the man's trying to communicate. It's Hebrew poetry. In the very first verse here it says, give ear to my word, O Lord, consider my meditation, give heed to my voice, to the voice of my cry, my King and my God, for to you I will pray. How many of us have prayed like this, whether it is out of years of understanding that nothing can be done well apart from the Lord, or desperation? We want our prayers to be heard by the Lord. And so did David. And that's the thing about David, is he didn't hold it back. And remember, God said that David was a man after his own heart. So when you go to prayer with God, he knows it already. You don't have to put on falsehood. You don't have to put on airs, be somebody you're not. Take it to God. He can handle whatever you throw at him. His grace will cover a multitude of sins. And I just encourage you, because he's going to help you out more than anybody else in this world could ever help you out, if you take everything that you care to him. Verse 3, my voice you shall hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning I will direct it to you, and I will look up. You see, in this right here, David Guzik says that this particular verse, David is using the words that they used to describe setting out the showbread at the beginning of the day in the temple of the Lord. And so David's actually trying to produce this imagery that he's setting out his prayers before God, his requests before the Lord, as one would set out the showbread in the temple on the altar. And so You think about that. David saw that his very prayers and communication was holy worship. It was a sacrifice. And you remember when they were bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, and they got it back there, and they're going to build a temple for God. And David had a census, and then because he had a census, God sent out this death angel, and he killed a bunch of people. And they were coming up to the threshing floor of Arunim on Mount Moriah, and David killed the oxen and used the cart and made a sacrifice to the Lord and asked God not to go any farther, and God stayed his hand. And David said, "Shall I go to the Lord and it costs me nothing?" David understood that whatever we do when we go to the Lord, there should be some kind of a sacrifice in it. And we should consider that. A sacrifice doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be cattle. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It could be your praise and your worship. He just wants you to be in reverence of him. If you really understand who God is and who we serve, then we would come into his presence with more reverence than we do today. A lot of times, and I love modern worship, and I think it's great, but I don't think we should come into his presence like God is your boyfriend. And I see some people doing that. No, you should come into that relationship with God, that God's your Father, your Heavenly Father. And we've all heard the terms, "I brought you into this world, I can take you out." You know? And that type of thing can happen. I mean, God does punish the wicked. And if we think that we're something special away from God, that we can just lightly treat our relationship with God, he's got a lot more lessons for us to learn. But David was telling us that he comes into the presence of God with reverence. Verse 4, "For you are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness, nor shall evil dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand in your sight. You hate all workers of iniquity." You know, many times carnal Christians, young Christians, people who aren't Christians think that God winks at sin. Because look at some of the stuff that happened in the Old Testament. David had multiple wives. Solomon had his wives. Then you got talk about people being killed for minor details and stuff. And it doesn't seem like they get any retribution. But David's saying here that God doesn't wink at wickedness. God takes it into account. And he won't let it dwell with him. And then in verse 5 it talks about how you hate all workers of iniquity. If you don't know what iniquity is willful sin. When you know what it's wrong to do, and yet you choose to go ahead and do it anyway, that's iniquity. I know, I always look up to 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Because there's many times in my own life where I've struggled with sin on different levels, and I have to go to him. Thank God for God's grace that covers the things I've done. Verse 6, "You shall destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors bloodthirsty and deceitful man." We think of a bloodthirsty man as some guy walking around carrying weapons with him and just indiscriminately killing people. But I think there's more death and destruction that's done through gossip. More hateful things. Wars are started like that, where people do a campaign of whispers in the back rooms and whisper against other people. And then pretty soon hatred develops. And then bloodshed happens. You know, I think that's the picture that David's trying to get across here. And you know, with all the palace intrigues that David had in his house, I would not be surprised. Verse 7, "But as for me, I will come to you into your house in the multitude of your mercy. In fear of you, I will worship toward your holy temple." David understood that before he could even come to the house of the Lord, he had to be right with God. And he had to seek the mercy of God to come into his house. He couldn't just willy-nilly come in and think everything was okay, because before God we're sinful people and he needed his sins paid for and covered. Verse 8, "Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness." because of my enemies. Make your way straight before my face. How many of us, when we've been in trouble, are looking for the straight way, the easy way, the way of escape to get out of whatever trouble we're in? David's saying the same thing. He wants a way out. He's wanting to find God's way. Verse 9, there's no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is destruction. Their throat is an open tomb. They flatter with their tongues. You know, how many times did I hear when I was growing up, a man with a suit and tie can steal more money than a man with a mask and a gun? Because it's just a different way of doing things. And we see people use flattery all the time to con people, to get their way. We need to understand that just because somebody isn't coming outward in a violent way doesn't mean there isn't violence in their actions of what they're doing. Because, like I said, a campaign of whispers and a campaign of gossip hurts a lot of people. Verse 10, pronounce them guilty, O God. Let them fall by their own counsel. Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against you. David wishes that they get caught up in their own schemes. Their backbiting, their colluding, and their gossip would turn back against them. And there's another saying that goes, give a man a rope and enough rope and he'll hang himself with it. And that's what David's talking about. He's talking about letting their own schemes and devices come back on their head. But then again, at the end of this psalm, he turns back to him and he rejoices in the Lord. And he gives God the glory. Verse 11, but let all those who rejoice, who put their trust in you, let them ever shout for joy because you defend them. Let those also who love your name be joyful in you. For you, O Lord, will bless the righteous. With favor, you will surround him with a shield. You know, when I read this, I thought about Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. You see, David's calling for justice and protection of the Lord. But Jesus has called us to pray for those people that have done things like this to ourselves. He's calling us to a different level, to a higher level. David, being the awesome military commander he was, he looked at the people around him and he spoke plainly about it. Yes, he was a king, and yes, he was a politician, but David was first and foremost a military commander. And he wasn't afraid to call it like it was, balls and strikes. And we move on to Psalm chapter 6. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger, nor chasten me in your hot displeasure. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am weak. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are troubled. My soul is greatly troubled. But you, O Lord, how long? Return, O Lord, deliver me. O save me for your mercy's sake. For in death there is no remembrance of you. In the grave, who will give you thanks? I am weary with groaning. All night I make my bed to swim. I drench my couch with tears. My eyes waste away because of grief. It grows old because all my enemies. Depart from me, all you who workers of iniquity. For the Lord has heard the voice of my weeping. The Lord has heard my supplications. The Lord will receive my prayers. Let all my enemies be ashamed and greatly troubled. Let them turn back and be ashamed suddenly. You know, in these first two verses, O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger, nor chasten me in your hot displeasure. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am weak. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are troubled. My soul is greatly troubled. But you, O Lord, how long? If you've ever been in a bad place, in a bad situation, and you're looking for a way out, and your life is troubled, you can relate to this, where you just ache with the situation, and your guts are being bound up in a knot. That's what David's talking about. David had lots of trouble in his life. I mean, think about this. The boy had a great childhood, growing up, taking care of the flocks. You know, most boys would really love that lifestyle, being out there, learning to use a slingshot, all that type of stuff, target practice. But soon after his childhood was over, he went to war. He took on Goliath. And then he went and he was sent to Saul to play the harp for Saul, because Saul was troubled in his spirit. And pretty soon Saul's trying to stick him to the wall with a spear. And then pretty soon Saul kind of calms down for a little bit, and David starts making a name for himself as a mighty man of God. And they come back into the town, and the women of the town are saying, Saul has killed his thousands and David has killed his tens of thousands. Because one of the prices for his first wife was to kill all these Philistines. But it wasn't good enough, because the spirit that had come on Saul was set to the destruction of David. And so David was a fugitive for several years. And he drew to him other people who were fugitives. And he spent time in the wilderness doing guerrilla warfare, protecting people's flocks, refining his men in military arts. And then he came back into the temple and came back into society, and he was only king of Judah for 7 years. He wasn't king of Israel right away. And after 7 years, he became king of Israel, the entire nation. And his kingdom and his reign was marked by battles, marked by war, marked by building things up. He was always on the move. He never had much rest. And then just about when he thought he was going to have rest, he falls morally, commits adultery, has a child out of wedlock, kills the woman's husband. And then the religious leader, one of the religious leaders of the day, comes into his royal courtroom, puts his finger in his face and says, "Thou art the man." This is the man that we're talking about. And yet God said that David was a man after his own heart. And why is that? Because David would go to the Lord with this stuff. When David was accused of killing Uriah the Hittite and sleeping with Bathsheba out of marriage, David confessed his sins. David sought forgiveness from the Lord. But you know what? The Word of God's true and right. And all those things that David did came back to haunt him. There's a verse that says, whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. And within David's own household, he had one son rape a daughter. He had another son kill that son. He had that son that killed the other son try to usurp his authority. And then his top general killed his son. This is David's family. And yet David was a man after God's own heart. What does that say? It's about grace. It was about grace from the beginning. It's about grace for us today. It's about grace going forward. And that's what David's trying to communicate across this, that he goes before the Lord with a contrite heart. He takes his stuff before the Lord. He understands that he needs forgiveness and mercy and grace from God. Verse 4, return, O Lord, deliver me. O save me for your mercy's sake. See, David knew that God was merciful. Think about Jonah. Jonah got mad with God because God told Jonah to go to Nineveh and preach repentance. And Jonah, being the hard guy he was, said, God, I didn't want to go to Nineveh because I knew that if they repented, you'd forgive them and you'd bring them back. Now, the Ninevites were some pretty wicked guys. Some of the stuff they would do to their enemies, they would put meat hooks through their collarbones and lead them away in captives in chains. It goes on and on. I'm not even going to go into all the stuff, but it's pretty brutal. And Jonah said, "You're going to forgive these people that?" And the answer to that is yes. See, Romans chapter 6, verse 23 says, "For the punishment of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord." It doesn't qualify what that sin is. That sin could be mass murder, or that sin could be a white lie. It says the punishment of sin is death. And David understood the mercies of the Lord. And he understood the grace of God. It took me many years. I was probably 44 before I understood the grace of God. And was still trying to earn my Lord's love and my Lord's approval. Not knowing that God loves us the same today as the day in which he saved us. And that we can't earn his love. We can just receive his love and his forgiveness. Verse 5. "For in death there is no remembrance of you. In the grave, who will give you thanks? I am weary with my groaning all night. I make my bed swim. I drench my couch with my tears. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows old because of all my enemies." David was besought time and time again on all sides. And he's bringing this to the Lord. You know, we're supposed to cast all our cares upon the Lord, for he cares for us, cares for you. In John chapter 21, I think of Peter being restored after he betrayed Christ. I have a lot in common with Peter. Oftentimes I open my mouth and I stick my foot right up to my kneecap. I say things, I do things I shouldn't do, and I just can relate to Peter. But this is the restoration of Peter in John chapter 21, starting in verse 15. "So, when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?' He said to him, 'Lord, you know that I love you.'" Now in the Greek, Christ is asking Peter, do you agape me? Do you have divine love for me? And Peter replies back to the Lord, "Lord, you know I phileo you. I have brotherly love for you." You got to give it to Peter this time. He's honest about what he really is thinking and what he's really feeling. He's not trying to build himself up here. He's had a total failure when he denied Christ. He said to him, "Feed my lambs." Verse 16, he said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" And he used the word agape again. And he said to him, "Lord, you know it, that I love you." He says, "I phileo you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you phileo me?" Peter grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Most assuredly I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you're old, you'll stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish." He spoke, signifying by the death which he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, "Follow me." Christ was willing to forgive Peter because of Peter's denial and rejection of him in his hour of need. In the time when Peter should have been the strongest, Peter was the weakest. Peter immediately went to attack the guys that came to arrest Christ in the garden. And he struck off the ear of the servant of the high priest. And when Christ said, "Put your sword away, Peter," it probably shocked him. He's like, Christ, isn't this what you're supposed to be doing? Aren't you supposed to be coming into your kingdom? He didn't understand. And he was totally at a loss to see his Lord being arrested like a common criminal and being led away. And so it hit him right in his soul, right in his heart. So by the time he come to the third time when somebody challenged him about who he was and his relationship to Christ, it was a little slave girl. Peter, this big burly fisherman, rejected Christ as some little slave girl. And yet Christ was willing to forgive him. And you know, if you read about that account where Peter denies Christ, you get the picture that Christ was just across the courtyard from Peter. And that Christ watched Peter reject him. And yet God, Jesus Christ, forgave Peter. And I think this has a lot to do with what David's talking about the mercies of God. Because some of the things that David did, you know, God did not let David build the temple of God. He says, that's for your son because you're a man of blood. David had been a warrior his whole life. He says, well, I might not be able to build it, but I can save up for it. And he put all his money away, and he put away materials for the temple. So when Solomon came to power at David's death, he had everything he needed to start building that temple. And I think that in our lives, when we've had failures that prevent us from doing things in ministry that we wish to do, or serving God in a way we wish to serve him, that we need to look to God, because he's not telling us we can't serve. He's telling us we have to serve differently. You know, we still serve the same Lord, and he's still forgiving, and his grace still extends to each one of us. And we need to keep looking to that grace, day in and day out. Especially when we don't feel like it. Just like when you should pray. When should you pray? It's when you don't feel like it. That's when you should pray. When should you ask forgiveness? When you don't feel like it. Because that's when you need it the most. Chapter 7. O Lord my God, in you I put my trust. Save me from all those who persecute me, and deliver me, lest they tear me like a lion. Rend me in pieces while there is none to deliver. O Lord my God, if there is iniquity in my hands, if I have repaid evil to him who was at peace with me, or have plundered my enemy without cause, let the enemy pursue me and overtake me. Yes, let him trample my life to the earth, and lay my honor in the dust. Selah. When you see this passage, Selah, it's a pause, it's a dramatic pause. You're supposed to stop for a second and think about what he just said. David is literally calling God to judge him. That's a pretty brave move. He isn't calling God to witness. He's calling God to judge. Have I ripped anybody off? Have I gone against anybody in hatred? Verse 6, arise, O Lord, in your anger. Lift yourself up because of the rage of my enemies. Rise up for me to the judgment you have commanded. So the congregation of the people shall surround you for their sakes. Therefore, return on high. The Lord shall judge the peoples. Judge me, O Lord, according to my righteousness and according to my integrity within me. O let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end, but establish the just. For the righteous God tests the hearts and minds. My defense is of God, who saves the upright in heart. God is a just judge, and God is angry with the wicked every day. If he does not turn back, he will sharpen his sword. He bends his bow, makes it ready. He also prepares himself instruments of death. He makes his arrows into fiery shafts. Behold, the wicked brings forth iniquity, yes, conceives trouble, and brings forth falsehood. He made a pit, dug it out, and has fallen into the ditch which he made. His trouble shall return upon his own head, and his violent dealings shall come down on his own crown. I will praise the Lord according to his righteousness, and will sing the praise to the name of the Lord on high. You know, David's calling God to witness on all this. I think he's had problems with Joab. He's had problems with Absalom. He's had problems with his other sons, his generals, his leaders. Then he knows he's had a moral failure. And I think the guy was probably exhausted. But he said one thing in here, talking about judge the just by their heart, talking about judging our hearts. I think David's heart, for the most part, most of the time, was set on justice and righteousness. You know, God even says that David was a man after his own heart. And yes, David made his mistakes, as we all do. But he was willing to call God as a judge to judge between him and his enemies. And remember what we talked about the other Psalms, about the campaign of whispers? Can you imagine the palace intrigue around David? Can you imagine people vying for his approval and trying to seek favor of David? Time and time again, I'm sure he had to sort through all of that. And I think that's how Absalom got into such a position where he could stand at the gate of the king's palace with his campaign of whispers and whisper in the people's ears and turn the hearts of the people away from David and to himself. And think about this. David knows that he's probably talking about his own sons here. His own sons have become his own enemies. And then when David has to flee from his own son, and he takes his group of people, his inner court with him, and they flee away from Absalom. And then they have to do battle with Absalom, and he knows that the outcome of the battle will probably be the death of his son. And he asks his generals and his officers and his captains not to kill his son. And yet his top general, he spears Absalom through the heart. Absalom was trying to flee away when he had lost the battle. His hair got caught up in the branches of a tree and yanked him off his horse. And they speared him to death. And then David did something, though, that kind of breaks your heart, because when they came back and they told David about his son's death, David went into the guardhouse, and he wept for his son and he mourned. And his general came in there and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Your people just fought a great battle for you to put you back on the throne. You need to get out there." So David was a man of conflict. Not only was he a man of conflict of war, he's a man of conflict within his own family. He was a man of conflict within his own life, considering the things he had done and the life he had led. Seeking forgiveness of God and mercies of God. But in his heart, David was trying to be the righteous man. No matter what had happened, no matter who said what, David was still trying to be the righteous man in his heart. He hadn't changed from that boy that came out of the flock and fought Goliath. He was still the same man, still looking to the same principles that had guided him so many years, where he had led men into battle and led a nation and brought a nation together instead of civil war, brought them all together. And then he just was a man who had his own failings. How many times have we seen great men of the past, even great preachers of the past, their kids are a total mess, but they're great leaders. And that's one thing that David was. I mean, his family was a total mess. He was permissive with his family. He didn't punish that one son for raping his daughter. And so his other son took matters into his own hand. And because of his apathy or abdication of his responsibilities to take care of problems, those problems cropped up in different ways. But what I would say about all of this is the fact that David sought the forgiveness of God. He looked to the Lord for his guidance, for his forgiveness, and for a way out of this stuff. You know, Galatians 6:7 says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. Some people call this the divine law of reciprocity. That's true. But I've got one that's better than that, the law of Christ, where Christ laid down his life for us on the cross. In John chapter 15, it says, greater love has no man than this, than if he lays down his life for his friends. But the one before it is the one that we should live by, which says in John chapter 15, verse 12, this one command I give you, that you love one another even as I have loved you. And what does that love look like in our modern life? People come from many different backgrounds. You have no idea what people have been through or gone or what they're under pressure now on. We need to have grace for those around us. In Romans it says, who are you to judge another man's servant? God's telling us that we're not the judge, he's the judge. And we need to leave that judgment up to him, and we need to be discerning and protect our families and do our jobs as husbands and men. We're to do that. But the other side of the thing is we're to have grace for those around us. You know, it says about in Corinthians, it says, we're to comfort one another, comfort those with the comfort with which we were comforted. Talking about the fact that God has sent his comfort, his grace, his forgiveness into our life. We're not to hold on to it, we're to give it away. We're to take the love that God gave us on his death on the cross and be forgiving and to give it away. I love the fact that David was open and honest in the Psalms, and he spoke it like it was, all the warts and all, because that inspires us to live an honest life with God. One of the most foolish things in this world is not asking God for forgiveness for things that we've done, because he already knows what you've done. You're not hiding from him. He saw it all. But he's there at the door the second you say, Lord, I need your forgiveness. Please forgive me for what I've done. He'll forgive you. So many people live in anxiety about their performance in life and their performance with things they've done and how they've failed. All that anxiety and all that worry and all that fear can go away if you just look to Christ and his finished work on the cross. You know, it's not Christ plus something else. Not Christ plus what you can do. Not Christ plus how much money you put in the pot. Not Christ plus this or Christ plus that. It's Christ and Christ alone and what he did on the cross. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. You see, somebody had to pay in blood. Either you pay in blood for your sins or you let Christ pay for your sins in his blood. Somebody has to pay the price. David knew this. David understood this. And I really think it's a bold thing that David called God to be the judge of this situation he's going through. It really is. And if anybody understood about the direct action of God, it would be David. Can you imagine the thoughts that went through his head when he killed Goliath as a young, say, 14-year-old boy? He goes running out there, and there's this guy standing 9 feet to 13 feet tall, and he takes this sling and he hits him in the forehead, and the guy falls over. I bet David almost fell over when that guy fell over. But David runs up there really quick, and he pulls out Goliath's sword and takes his head off just to be sure. Okay? So I think David was probably as shocked as the rest of us. But the reality is that David kept going back to the Lord throughout his entire life, just as we should. That's what I got for you guys. But I just encourage you to look at Peter's life, look at David's life, look at every one of these guys. They are men of flaws, men with great failings in their life, who had done some terrible things. But they were forgiven men of God. And they were mighty men of God. And you need to have compassion for those people around you that have failed. Your job is not to condemn them. Your job is to pick them up, dust them off, and put them back in the fight. That's what our job is. Guys, We are to share God's love. Let's pray.